Denise Hudak, and I'm with PPRO. I am VP of Commercial for the Americas. So the reason why we have developed the PPRO Almanac is because we've had this almanac in the market for years, and it's sort of become the calling card for PPRO. It used to be a thick book that we would produce and send out to the industry, and so we've gotten questions, when is the next almanac coming out? And what we've decided to do, instead of creating simple data of payment methods and simple data of markets, we've actually taken it from looking at from a corridor. And we're starting off with the first corridor being the US merchants selling into the Latin American market. And instead of kind of just sending raw data, we're taking this data and creating it from that lens of these US merchants so that they can take this data, but also information on what do you think about going into the Latin America market, and how do you take that data and understand the opportunities and the challenges for going into that market. And the reason why we are taking US to LATAM is that the LATAM is a huge market that has huge growth potential. It's growing fast. The LATAM market is $633 billion market as of numbers from 2024, and it's growing rapidly. And today, US have a large export to LATAM, as it is 440 billion e-commerce to the top 6 LATAM markets. So we're already seeing that there's a big growth today, and there's a big need for US merchants to kind of understand what are the challenges and opportunities for you go into this market. And that's the reason we have launched this new almanac in the Corridor series. The reason they should pay attention to what payment methods they need to consider is that digital payments are evolving quickly in Latin America right now. For instance, we have PIX in Brazil. That wasn't even a payment method 5 years ago, or they were sort of founded and born 5 years ago by the central bank in Brazil. But generally, some of these payment methods like bank transfers and digital wallet are growing really quickly. Bank transfers are growing 30% year over year, and digital wallets are growing 19% year over year. So it's a huge growth trajectory for these types of payment methods. We also see a lot of growth for buy now, pay later. They're also growing about 30%. They're only taking up a small market share, about 1%, but growing very quickly. But of course, in LATAM, one way of paying with what we consider buy now, pay later installments have always been a factor down there, but now more traditional buy now, pay later that we've seen in US and Europe region are sort of taking some market share and growing very quickly. So it's a very dynamic market, and it's very different also for each country within the LATAM market. So it's important to understand each market and how the consumer wants to pay, which is quite different. I think it's mainly two things that needs to be considered. That often is a challenge, and maybe some misconceptions about that. One, thinking about the region as one can be very challenging because there are many countries in LATAM and they behave very differently. They behave very differently from what type of payment methods you have there, what regulatory landscapes you have, how the various payment methods and banks are doing remittances and reconciliation, and then you have FX challenges on top of that, and that might be different in different markets, as well as tax. And tax, I think, is the one thing that really is considered a challenge. Brazil and Colombia seem to always be on top of the tax complexity index in the world. So getting tax wrong when you're going local in a market like Brazil and Colombia can be very expensive if you don't do it right. So these are things to consider when you're going into the market that you might not think about when you just want to take payment from a local consumer in Latin America. The other reason is that local payment methods behave very differently. you need to consider taking one type of payment methods that might have a QR code, another one might have barcode or PDF vouchers. So it's a lot of different types of behavior from these payment methods and how you kind of manage them from an integration perspective. So a lot of different payment methods that have just inherently different type of infrastructure. And so those are things to really think about how you manage it when you go local. The main thing you have to pay attention to, because when you start serving the LATAM market and you're doing it from a cross-border acquiring, you will see very low authorization rate, very low performance. And the reason for that is that a lot of the issuing banks in Latin America are not allowing the local cards to be processed cross-border. Sometimes the consumer can call up their bank and enable their card from a cross-border purchase, but the consumer needs to know to do that. And in many cases, they can't even do that. And in addition, the banks often have an algorithm in terms of fraud scoring that just simply decline the transaction. So, if they're used to seeing, 80-90% auth rates in some markets, it goes down all of a sudden maybe to 30 or much lower than that. And so you really have to consider processing locally to be able to accept, card payments. So I think we see about 29% of the local card payments in LATAM are not enabled for cross-border purchases. Digital and instant bank payments are growing by leaps and bounds, and it was Pix in Brazil that really took off around COVID. So in 2020 it was launched, and a lot of the markets in Latin America have kind of looked to Brazil to replicate the success that's seen with Pix, or maybe even starting to take the acceptance of Pix today. But we're also seeing huge growth for digital wallets. A lot of the digital wallets are really growing, particularly in Mexico, Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. And we're seeing some of these digital wallets really taking off, to become a super app. A lot what we're seeing in Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, there's a lot of super apps that we're aware of course, today in terms of GrabPay, Alipay, etc. So a lot of the digital wallets in LATAM are taking cue from this behavior, and now with some of these wallets like Mercado Pago, like Nequi, like Rappi, and others, you can now both pay, borrow, shop, and they're pulling consumers in to spend more of their everyday sort of interaction with purchases on these apps. So I think that's really going to grow as we see in the next coming years in these countries that I mentioned. A lot of digital goods companies are entering and looking to enter the Latin America market. A lot of them are utilizing a subscription type of payment method, and a lot of the banks and payment methods are becoming more and more comfortable with the subscription-based payment method, where not always the consumers are initiating that payment, because it might be a merchant-initiated payment, has been traditionally seen as a lot of fraud coming in terms of processing these payment methods, but both payment methods and banks are becoming more comfortable as subscription-based companies are coming into LATAM. And so we're going to see a lot more functionality around subscription and recurring payments being launched and supported in the region.